The worst pain in the galaxy is not the flaying of flesh or the shattering of bone. It is the knowledge that you exist solely as entertainment, and that your suffering will never, ever end. I was taken on the third moon of Valthex Prime, during what the Administratum would later classify as a minor xenos incursion. Minor. That word makes me laugh now, though the sound that comes from whatever remains of my throat is nothing like laughter anymore. There were 40,000 souls on that mining colony, and by the time the raiders finished, there were none. Well, none left behind. Hundreds of us were taken instead, dragged through shimmering portals that tore reality like wet parchment, our screams swallowed by a darkness that had texture and taste, bitter like copper and burnt ozone and something else, something that made every instinct in my body rebel, even as my limbs went numb with paralysis. I remember the moment before it happened with the clarity reserved only for the worst memories. I was a salvage technician, nothing special, just another cog in the Imperium's vast machine of production and decay. My name was Garrett Hollis. I had a wife named Mira and a daughter I'd only seen in grainy pick captures because I'd been off-world for 3 years straight, saving credits for our retirement HAB unit on a better world than Valthex. I remember thinking, as I hauled corrupted machinery from Shaft 9 Delta, that in 6 more months I'd have enough saved. 6 more months and I could go home. I remember the lights flickering, not the usual brownouts from overloaded generators, but something else, something that made the air taste wrong. Then came the screaming from the upper levels and the gunfire, and then the lights went out entirely, and in that perfect darkness I heard laughing. Not human laughing. Something cruel and musical and utterly alien, the sound of broken glass bells and dying children's giggles twisted into something obscene. When the emergency illuminators finally kicked on, I saw them. Tall, impossibly tall and inhumanly slender, their armor was midnight blue and deep purple shot through with veins of what looked like living darkness. Their faces, Emperor preserve me, their faces were beautiful and terrible in equal measure, sharp-featured and predatory, with eyes like chips of amethyst that held nothing but contempt and cruel amusement. They moved through us like dancers, like artists at work, and everywhere they went, blood followed. Not just blood, they were taking people, dozens of people, wrapping them in chains that sparked with sickly green light and hauling them toward the portals. I tried to run. Of course I tried to run. But one of them, she was female, I think, though gender seemed almost decorative on these creatures, simply looked at me, and my legs stopped working. Just stopped. I collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, and she glided over to me, her armor making sounds like wind chimes made of razors, and placed one long-fingered hand on my head. I felt something probe my mind, not gently, rifling through my thoughts like someone ransacking a HAB unit looking for valuables. She made a satisfied sound, said something in a language that hurt to hear, and then I was being dragged toward the portal. The transition was agony, not physical pain, not yet, but a fundamental wrongness, as if every atom in my body was being turned inside out and reassembled incorrectly. I could feel the material universe peeling away from me, could sense dimensions that human minds were never meant to perceive, brushing against my consciousness like razor wire against exposed nerves. And then I was through, and I was in Camera, and I understood with perfect, crystalline clarity that my life as I had known it was over forever. Camera. Even now, after what might be centuries, I've lost count, lost any meaningful measure of time. Even now, the name fills me with a terror so profound it transcends mere fear and becomes something else entirely. Something philosophical. The Dark City. The Impossible City. A metropolis carved from the webway itself, existing in a pocket dimension beyond the reach of she who thirsts, beyond the laws of physics and sanity and mercy. Imagine a city the size of a solar system, all spires and platforms and bridges, spanning chasms so deep their bottoms fade into purple-black infinity. Imagine architecture that defies geometry, buildings that are taller on the inside than their exteriors could possibly contain, streets that curve upward until they connect with structures overhead, creating an endless labyrinth of verticality that would drive a savant mad trying to map. Imagine skies, if they can be called skies, that writhe with captured stars dying slowly, their light filtered through what looks like massive rib cages of crystallized shadow, casting everything in hues of purple and crimson and sick green. The first thing that hits you is the noise. Komarov screams, constantly, a baseline roar of anguish that comes from everywhere and nowhere, the accumulated suffering of millions upon millions of prisoners woven into an ambient sound that never stops, never even quiets. It's punctuated by laughter, always laughter, the cruel merriment of the Drukhari as they go about their daily business of inflicting torment. And music, endless music, but not music as humans understand it. These are compositions constructed from screams, melodies built from the breaking of bones and the tearing of flesh, rhythms derived from heartbeats gradually slowing into death, beautiful in the way a supernova is beautiful, gorgeous, and absolutely lethal. The second thing is the smell. Komarov has a scent, thick and cloying, that coats your throat and lungs with every breath. It's blood, yes, always blood, but also incense made from rendered soul stuff, chemical compounds that shouldn't exist, exotic venoms and drugs distilled from suffering itself, and underneath it all something sweet and rotten like flowers growing from corpses. You never get used to it. I've tried. Your body simply refuses to acclimate, as if some deep survival instinct recognizes that accepting this smell means accepting this place, and accepting this place means accepting that you will never leave. They took us to holding pens first, massive amphitheaters carved from black stone that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. Thousands of us, packed together, humans and aliens I'd never seen before, species I couldn't even name. Some were crying. Most were silent with shock. A few were praying, and I remember thinking how futile that seemed. How could the Emperor's light possibly reach into this place? But I prayed too, eventually. Not because I believed he'd hear me, but because it was the last human thing I could think to do. The Drukhari walked among us, examining us like livestock at a market. They spoke to each other in their musical, hateful language, occasionally grabbing someone and pulling them from the crowd. I learned later they were sorting us. The strong and young went to the arenas. The beautiful went to the pleasure cults. The technically skilled went to the homunculi laboratories. The rest, those with no obvious value, went to the general torment pits, where they'd be slowly consumed for the simple sustenance their suffering could provide. I was chosen by a homunculus. I didn't know what that meant at the time. I do now. His name, or the closest approximation my mouth could form, was Vexathrixus. When I first saw him, I thought he was wearing elaborate armor, but as he drew closer, I realized with mounting horror that what I was seeing was his actual body. A nightmare of modified flesh and grafted augmentations, of extra limbs sprouting from shoulders and spine, of a face that had been reconstructed so many times that the original features were lost beneath layers of surgical artistry. His eyes were multifaceted like an insect's, but aware, intelligent, filled with a curiosity that was somehow worse than cruelty because it was so clinical, so detached. He selected 12 of us from the pens, examining each carefully, taking biological samples with instruments that caused exquisite pain as they extracted flesh. When he reached me, he paused, his head tilting in a way that was distinctly inhuman, those terrible eyes studying me with what might have been interest. He pressed one long claw against my temple, and I felt that invasive presence in my mind again, but deeper this time, rifling through not just my surface thoughts, but my memories, my personality, the very architecture of my consciousness. "This one," he said, and his voice was like silk drawn over broken glass, speaking Gothic with an accent that turned every word into something subtly wrong. "This one has experienced loss, recent loss, a wife and child he will never see again. The grief is fresh, the hope not yet extinguished. Excellent. Hope is the finest seasoning for despair." He took us to his laboratory. Calling it a laboratory doesn't capture it, really. Imagine an operating theater the size of a cathedral, with vaulted ceilings lost in shadows that moved with their own volition, with walls lined by tanks containing things that had once been people, but were now something else entirely. Their bodies reconfigured into forms that served decorative or experimental purposes. Hanging from chains were subjects in various stages of modification, some sleeping under sedation, others awake and screaming, Their bodies opened like flowers to display the workings within. The floor was pristine black glass, polished to a mirror shine, so you could see yourself as you were dragged to your fate, could watch your own reflection as you understood what was about to happen. Vexathrixis strapped me to a table, not crude restraints, but living restraints, tendrils that grew from the table itself and wrapped around my limbs with gentle, obscene intimacy. Other subjects were secured nearby, and I could see them struggling, could hear their pleading. One of them was a young woman, couldn't have been more than 20, and she was crying for her mother. That detail has stayed with me. In all the horror that followed, I still remember her crying for her mother. "Let me explain," Vexathrixis said, approaching with an instrument that looked like a many-jointed spider made of surgical steel. "What you are now, you are no longer Garrett Hollis, technician of Valthex Prime. You are material. You are a canvas. You are a question I intend to answer through rigorous experimentation. The question is, how much can I change you before you cease to be you? How far can I push the boundaries of your flesh and mind before the essential spark of your identity gutters out? It is a question that fascinates me, one I have explored thousands of times, and yet each subject provides unique data." He began his work, and I learned what true pain was. I had thought I understood pain. I'd broken bones before, suffered burns, endured the casual brutalities of industrial work, but those were mere discomforts compared to this. Vexathrixis was an artist of agony, a virtuoso who understood pain not as a crude sensation but as a spectrum of experiences, each with its own texture and flavor. He started with the nerves, exposing them, stimulating them individually with measured electrical pulses that sent lightning through my body. He narrated as he worked, explaining what he was doing in that silken glass voice, telling me which nerve clusters produced which varieties of suffering, pointing out how pain could be modulated and sustained, how the brain could be prevented from retreating into shock or unconsciousness. Hours passed, days maybe. He removed my skin, section by section, but kept me alive with fluid infusions and surgical skill beyond anything human medicine could achieve. He showed me my own muscles, let me watch them contract and relax as he stimulated them, made me an observer of my own vivisection. He opened my chest and adjusted my organs, improving them, he said, making me more efficient, harder to kill, capable of surviving traumas that would destroy an unmodified human. And through it all, through every second of it, I remained conscious and aware, feeling everything with crystalline clarity, because he wouldn't allow me the mercy of losing consciousness. When he finally sealed me back up, my skin regrown through some alchemical process I couldn't begin to understand, I was changed. Not just traumatized, but fundamentally altered. My body worked differently now. I could feel it. Enhanced cardiovascular system, reinforced skeletal structure, modified pain receptors that would never dull, never acclimate, so that every new torture would be experienced with the same raw intensity as the first. I was a better canvas now, Vexathrixis explained. More durable, capable of providing years, perhaps decades of useful data. That was my first cycle. My introduction to what it meant to be a prisoner of the Drukhari. There is no day or night in Qamara, only shifts in the quality of darkness and the intensity of the screaming. Time becomes meaningless when there's no sun to mark its passage, no seasons to divide it into manageable segments. I lived by cycles instead, periods of torment followed by brief respites in the holding cells, just long enough for the homunculus's modifications to fully integrate before the next round of experimentation began. Cycle 2 involved the addition of extra limbs. Vexathrixis grafted alien appendages onto my torso, 6 spindly insectoid legs that sprouted from my sides, and then spent weeks training me to use them through a combination of neural stimulation and behavioral conditioning. The conditioning was perhaps worse than the surgery itself. He would cause pain, intense pain, until I moved the limbs correctly, and then the pain would stop. Pavlovian torture. I learned to skitter on those legs like the insect he was making me into. Learned to hate myself for adapting, for complying, for doing anything to make the pain stop even temporarily. Cycle 3 was psychological. He placed me in a simulation chamber, another piece of technology I couldn't comprehend, something that hooked directly into my brain and created perfect, indistinguishable illusions. He showed me my escape. Let me believe I'd been rescued by the Imperial Guard. Let me experience the joy of freedom, of transport back to human space, of reunion with my wife and daughter. The simulation lasted months. I lived an entire life in that illusion, watching my daughter grow, growing old with Mira, finding peace, and then Vexathrixis shattered it. Turned it off mid-embrace with my wife, and suddenly I was back on the table, back in the laboratory, and he was leaning over me with those multifaceted eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Your grief," he said, "is exquisite, so much richer now. You have experienced loss twice, the original loss, and now the loss of the illusion of recovering from loss. Layered trauma, magnificent. I broke during cycle 3, really broke. Not my body. My body had been broken repeatedly, shattered and rebuilt so many times it no longer felt like mine. But my mind, my sense of self, the core of who Garrett Hollis had been, that fractured. I screamed until my voice was gone, and then kept screaming in silence. I begged for death. I begged for mercy. I begged for it to stop. Please, Emperor, please just let it stop." Vexathrixis listened to my begging with the same clinical interest he'd shown throughout, taking notes, measuring my psychological deterioration, nodding approvingly when I reached new depths of despair. But he never let me die. That was perhaps his greatest cruelty. Whenever I came close, whenever my heart gave out or my brain shut down from the trauma, he would bring me back. His technology, his skill, his inhuman understanding of biology, all deployed not to preserve life, but to prevent the escape of death. I died 17 times during cycle 3. 17 times I felt my consciousness fading, felt that blessed darkness rising up to swallow me, and 17 times Vexathrixis dragged me back, resurrected me, forced me to continue experiencing everything he had planned. Cycle 4 introduced other prisoners into my torment. Vexathrixis wanted to study empathy under duress, so he brought the young woman who'd cried for her mother. Her name was Sarah, I learned. We all eventually learned each other's names in those cells between sessions, and began working on her while I was forced to watch. He didn't just torture her, he modified her, broke her down, and rebuilt her into something that barely resembled human anymore. All while I was strapped in place a few meters away, unable to help, unable to even look away because he'd clamped my eyelids open. Sarah screamed for help. Specifically, she screamed for me to help her, begged me to do something, anything, and I couldn't. I was helpless. And Vexathrixis measured my responses, noted the physiological changes that accompanied my helpless horror, the spike in stress hormones, the sympathetic pain response, the way my newly modified body tried and failed to produce enough adrenaline to break his restraints. Sarah lasted 3 weeks before she died a final time that not even the homunculus could reverse. He seemed disappointed by that, mentioned something about inferior human stock, weak baseline genetics. Then he brought in another prisoner and started over, making me watch, measuring my decreasing emotional responses as I became numb, documenting the death of my empathy with the same thoroughness he documented everything else. By cycle 7, or was it 8, 9? I was losing count even then. I had forgotten what I looked like before. My body was a patchwork of modifications, alien tissues grafted alongside human, organs that served no purpose except to provide new vectors for pain, sensory organs that let me perceive dimensions of reality I desperately wished I couldn't. I was taller now, my spine extended, extra vertebrae added to accommodate more surface area for modification. My face had been restructured, not to look alien. Vexathrixis had no interest in that, but to create new areas of sensitive tissue, new nerve clusters to stimulate. When I saw my reflection in the black glass floor, I didn't recognize the creature looking back at me. And still, through it all, I clung to one thing, my name. Garrett Hollis. I repeated it to myself during the torments, whispered it in the holding cells, carved it into my own flesh when I had access to anything sharp. Garrett Hollis. It became a mantra, a lifeline, proof that somewhere beneath all the modifications and trauma, the person I had been still existed. Vexathrixis noticed this, of course. He noticed everything. "Fascinating," he said during cycle 12, as he installed crystalline implants directly into my brain tissue. "You cling to your name as if it means something, as if identity is more than the sum of your physical form and experiences. We Drukhari understand the truth. The self is fluid, malleable, a story we tell ourselves that can be rewritten at will. But you humans, you treat identity as sacred, as fixed. It makes you vulnerable in such interesting ways. He set about attacking that vulnerability with the same methodical precision he'd applied to my flesh. More illusion chambers, more false rescues, and shattered hopes. Periods where he convinced me I was someone else entirely, implanting false memories, suppressing my real ones, making me believe I was a Drukhari, a slave who'd always been a slave, a piece of furniture that had somehow developed consciousness. Then he'd reverse it, restore my real memories, make me experience the horror of understanding what I'd become, what I'd believed, what I'd done, while thinking I was someone else. The self-loathing from those episodes was indescribable. Somewhere around cycle 20, I think it was 20, though by then time had become so fluid I could no longer trust my perception of it, Vexathrixis sold me. The transaction was handled in one of Comrag's many markets, vast plazas where the Drukhari trade in slaves and suffering. I was displayed along with hundreds of other modified subjects, standing on a platform while potential buyers examined us, discussing our merits and flaws in that musical language of theirs. I understood more of it now. Vexathrixis had installed linguistic implants during Cycle 15, said it would enhance my torment if I could understand the Drukhari discussing my fate. He was right, of course. Ignorance had been a small mercy I hadn't appreciated until it was stripped away. My buyer was a witch named Kalira, a warrior of the arena cults who wanted something unusual for the upcoming display fights. She purchased 3 of us, myself, a human man whose body had been reconstructed to contain dozens of redundant organs, and something that might have once been human, but was now more crystalline than flesh. We were taken to the witch cult's district, a section of Kamara where the architecture was even more aggressive. All sharp angles and spikes, arenas rising like metal mountains from plazas slick with old blood. The witches were different from the homunculi. No less cruel, but their cruelty was more direct, less contemplative. They didn't torture for scientific curiosity, but for entertainment, for the roar of the crowd, for the pure joy of inflicting violence. Kalira explained this to us as we were prepared for our first fight. She was beautiful in that sharp-edged Drukhari way, her face both alluring and terrifying, her body a weapon wrapped in minimal armor. She circled us in the preparation chamber, examining what Vexathrixis had made us into, nodding approvingly. "The crowd loves novelty," she said, her Gothic accent less precise than the homunculus's, but no less unsettling. "They've seen humans fight humans 1,000 times. But humans like you, modified, enhanced, clearly suffering, that's entertainment. You'll fight each other first, I think. Let the audience see what you can do. The survivor gets to face me." The fight took place in an arena that held tens of thousands of Drukhari, all screaming their approval, baying for blood. The noise was overwhelming, a physical force that pressed against my modified eardrums. The man with redundant organs and I were pushed into the sand, given crude weapons. I received a jagged piece of metal that might have once been part of a blade, and told to begin. The crystalline thing watched from the sidelines, awaiting its turn. I didn't want to fight. Neither did my opponent. I could see it in his eyes, the same desperate humanity that I felt in myself. But the witches had installed pain collars on us, and when we hesitated, when we didn't move to attack each other, the collars activated, sending lightning through our nervous systems until we were convulsing in the sand. The pain was extraordinary, even by Kamarite standards, designed to break any resistance immediately. And it worked. Emperor, forgive me, it worked. I attacked him because the pain demanded it, because my modified body responded to stimulus even when my mind rebelled, because survival instinct trumped morality when the alternative was suffering. I killed him. Took me nearly an hour, because neither of us really knew how to fight, and because his redundant organs meant he could survive injuries that would have killed a normal human.
But eventually, I found something vital, some cluster of hearts or neural centers that even his modifications couldn't compensate for. And he died in the sand while the Drukhari cheered. The sound of their approval was worse than the sound of his dying. So much worse. Because it meant I'd given them what they wanted, that I'd been broken and made into entertainment, That Garrett Hollis, the salvage technician who'd loved his wife and daughter, had been turned into a killer who murdered for the amusement of xenos. Calera rewarded me by making the fight with her quick. She danced around me for a few minutes, letting the crowd see the disparity in our skills, then opened my throat with one elegant strike and left me bleeding out in the sand. I died again. My 23rd death? 27th? I'd lost count and woke in a resurrection chamber, my body repaired, ready for the next fight. The arena cycles were different from the laboratory cycles, but no less horrible. Where Vexithrixis had been methodical and clinical, the witches were chaotic and creative. Every fight was different. Sometimes I fought other prisoners. Sometimes I fought beasts, alien creatures bred for aggression, some of them clearly sapient, clearly as much victims as I was. Sometimes I fought while poisoned, or partially blind, or with my limbs bound. The witches made a game of it, constantly inventing new handicaps, new variables to make the fights more interesting for the audience. And the audience was always there, thousands of Drukhari watching with rapt attention, their hunger for suffering palpable even from the arena floor. They screamed when I killed. They screamed louder when I was killed. They threw things into the arena, not just refuse, but gifts, exotic weapons or drugs or stranger things, bribes to make me perform in certain ways.
It was during this period that I truly lost track of time. Not just lost track, lost the ability to conceptualize time as meaningful. When every day is identical, when death and resurrection are regular occurrences, when your only measure of time passing is the accumulation of trauma, the concept of linear time breaks down. Was I in the arena for 5 years, 50, 500? I genuinely don't know. I have memories of thousands of fights, but memory in camera is unreliable. The Drukhari have technologies that can implant false memories, or suppress real ones, or fragment time perception so that minutes feel like years and years feel like minutes. I may have been in the arena for a single year that felt like centuries. I may have been there for actual centuries. Both possibilities are equally plausible and equally horrible. What I do know is that eventually Calera tired of me. Not because I fought poorly, I was still providing entertainment, but because novelty fades in camera, and what was once fresh and interesting becomes routine. She sold me to an Archon, one of the noble lords who rule the Dark Cities districts, and I left the arenas for a different kind of hell. The Archon's name was Zelethriax, and his interest in me was neither scientific like Vexithrixis's, nor direct like Calera's. He collected things. Specifically, he collected suffering. His palace, calling it a palace, doesn't capture the scale. It was more like a district unto itself. Spires rising impossibly high, connected by bridges made of what looked like frozen screams, was filled with prisoners serving various decorative purposes. Some were statues, their bodies locked in poses of agony and terror. Some were furniture, their forms modified to serve as chairs or tables while remaining alive and aware. Some were art installations, their suffering carefully orchestrated to create aesthetic experiences for Drukhari visitors. Zelethriax decided I would be a trophy. His trophy chamber was a vast hall lined with alcoves, each containing a prisoner representing some conquest or achievement. A space marine from a chapter I didn't recognize, his armor fused to his body, his flesh slowly being consumed by some crystalline growth that kept him alive and suffering. An Eldar craftworlder, her body suspended in a field of temporal distortion so that she experienced every second as an hour of agony. Hundreds of others, each representing a story, a victory, a moment of triumph for the Archon. My alcove was prepared carefully. Zelethriax wanted me to represent the breaking of hope, and toward that end, he had his homunculi, not Vexithrixis, but others of his kind, perform new modifications. They installed devices in my brain that would generate illusions automatically, creating false visions of rescue that would replay endlessly, hope kindling and dying and kindling again in an eternal cycle. They positioned my body in a reaching pose, arms outstretched toward a holographic image of a human world, forever trying to grasp something that didn't exist. They installed neural amplifiers that would broadcast my suffering, so that anyone entering the trophy chamber would feel an echo of what I experienced, would sense the despair radiating from me like heat. Then they sealed me in. The alcove was dimensional space, larger inside than its exterior suggested. and within it I was frozen. Not physically. My body could still move, still react, but I was locked in place by some technology I couldn't understand. Some manipulation of physics that kept me positioned exactly as Zelethriax wanted. The illusions began immediately. I saw ships arriving to rescue me. I saw Imperial forces fighting through Kamara. I saw my wife and daughter reaching for me, their voices calling my name. And each time, just as I was about to reach them, the illusion shattered, leaving me alone in the alcove, still reaching, still hoping, despite knowing it was false, because the modifications ensured I couldn't stop hoping, couldn't become numb to the cycle. I don't know how long I was there. In the trophy chamber, time had no meaning at all. Drukhari came and went, admiring Zelethriax's collection, pausing by my alcove to sample my broadcasted despair, commenting on the quality of my suffering. I heard them through the dimensional barrier. Their voices were translated automatically by my implants, so I understood every word. They praised the Archon's taste. They discussed the technical excellence of the modifications. They debated whether my suffering was more refined than the Space Marines or the Craft Worlders. I was a conversation piece, an objet d'art. My agony was aesthetic pleasure for creatures that fed on such things. During this period, years, centuries, I lost everything that remained of Garrett Hollis. Not suddenly, not in one dramatic moment of breaking, but gradually, like ice melting so slowly you don't notice until it's gone. The person I'd been, already damaged beyond recognition by the laboratory and the arena, dissolved entirely in that alcove. My identity became the reaching. My existence became the cycle of false hope and real despair. When I thought of myself, I no longer thought, I am Garrett Hollis, but I am the one who reaches. I am the one who hopes and fails. I am suffering given form. The Drukhari had succeeded in erasing me. Not by killing Garrett Hollis, death would have been mercy, but by transforming him so completely that nothing of the original remained except the capacity to suffer. I was eventually removed from the trophy chamber. Not out of mercy, the Drukhari have no mercy, but because Zelethriax was destroyed in one of the periodic power struggles that defined Kamarite politics. His palace was claimed by a rival, his collection dispersed, his prisoners sold or gifted to other factions. I was purchased by something called the Cult of the Twisted Helix, a homunculus coven that specialized in extreme biological modification. They took what remained of me and began the process of transformation anew. The Twisted Helix was interested in creating living weapons, bodies modified so extensively they no longer resembled their original species but instead became unto weapons. They had dozens of subjects in various stages of modification, things that had once been human or Eldar or Tau or species I'd never encountered, all being rebuilt into instruments of destruction. My modifications made me an ideal candidate, they explained. I was already heavily altered, already broken, already so far from baseline human that transforming me further would be trivial. The process took, I have no idea, a long time. My memories of it are fragmented, partly because the modifications included extensive neurological work that disrupted memory formation, partly because the sheer agony of it caused my mind to shut down repeatedly, creating gaps in my recollection. I remember being disassembled and reassembled. I remember body parts that weren't mine being grafted on, alien limbs, organs from creatures that had never existed in nature. I remember my skeleton being replaced section by section with something stronger, something that could support the weight of what I was becoming. I remember my flesh being seeded with bioweapon cultures, making my body itself toxic, a plague vector that could spread suffering through mere proximity. They made me huge, easily 3 times the height of a baseline human, my body massive and grotesque, more monster than man. My face, what remained of it, was set into a permanent rictus of pain, the muscles modified so I couldn't even close my mouth, couldn't stop expressing agony. My hands were weapons, fingers elongated into claws that wept venomous fluids. My back sprouted appendages that could lash out independently, each tipped with barbs soaked in toxins that caused hallucinogenic agony in whatever they touched. But the worst modification was cognitive. The Twisted Helix wanted their living weapons to retain intelligence, to be able to follow orders and adapt tactically, but they couldn't risk rebellion. So they installed control mechanisms directly into my brain, overrides that would paralyze me if I attempted to resist commands, pain generators that would activate if I even thought about harming my handlers. They turned my consciousness into a prison within a prison, my body acting out violence I didn't want to commit while my mind screamed helplessly in the background. They tested me extensively, put me in chambers with other failed experiments, and watched me tear them apart, my body moving according to its programming while I begged internally for it to stop. Put me against captured enemies and measured my effectiveness as I killed soldiers who'd done nothing to me, who didn't deserve what I'd become. Put me in scenarios designed to stress my systems, to find the breaking points and failure modes of their creation. I failed eventually. Not in the sense of dying, they'd made me too durable for that, but in the sense of breaking free. During one test, something glitched in the control systems. Just for a moment, just a fraction of a second, I had control of my own body again. And in that moment, I attacked my handlers. Didn't kill them, the control systems reasserted themselves too quickly, but the damage was done. I demonstrated unpredictability, and in Kamara, unpredictable weapons are worthless. They couldn't trust me anymore, so they sold me again. To the fighting pits this time, not the elegant arenas where Kalira had made me a champion, but the deep pits where the violence was rawer, more desperate, where prisoners fought to the death for the amusement of the lowest dregs of Drukhari society. I was chained and dragged through kilometers of descending passages, past cells filled with things that moaned and gibbered, past torture chambers where screams provided ambient sound, past markets where flesh was currency and suffering was commodity, down and down into the bowels of the dark city, where the purple light barely reached, and the air itself seemed to press down with malevolent weight. The pits were exactly what the name suggested, massive circular depressions carved into the floor of Kamara, ringed by crude seating where Drukhari spectators gathered to watch the carnage. No sophisticated holographic displays, no elegant presentation, just raw violence. They threw prisoners into the pits, sometimes individually, sometimes in groups, and let nature take its brutal course. There was no resurrection here. When you died in the pits, you stayed dead, your body thrown onto the corpse piles that lined the perimeter, slowly decaying in Kamara's recycling systems that rendered everything eventually into usable materials. I fought in the pits for what felt like years. My modifications from the Twisted Helix made me nearly unstoppable against most opponents. Other prisoners, beasts, even the occasional Drukhari challenger looking for sport. I killed hundreds, maybe thousands. Not because I wanted to, not anymore. By this point, I'd transcended want, transcended desire, transcended any human motivation. I killed because my body was designed to kill, because my programming dictated it, because stopping meant being torn apart myself, and some animal survival instinct deep in my reconstructed biology refused to allow that, even when my consciousness begged for it. Between fights, I was kept in a cell so small I couldn't stand fully upright, couldn't lie down completely, existed in a permanent state of cramped discomfort. Other prisoners were in adjacent cells, things that had been human, things that had been alien, things that had been so modified it was impossible to tell what they'd originally been. We didn't speak much. What was there to say? We all knew our purpose. We all knew our fate. We existed to die spectacularly for Drukhari entertainment, and the only variable was when and how. It was in those cells that I met something that changed everything, though I didn't realize it at the time. A prisoner in the cell next to mine, something that looked vaguely arachnid, with too many legs and eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. It spoke Gothic. All prisoners in Kamara eventually learned Gothic. It was the lingua franca of the damned, and its voice had a quality that suggested extreme age, wariness beyond measure. "How long have you been here?" it asked one night, after a particularly brutal day of fighting. I tried to answer, but couldn't. I'd lost track of time so completely that the question was meaningless. Was it years, centuries, millennia? I'd died and been resurrected dozens of times, fought in multiple arenas, served multiple masters, been modified beyond recognition. How could I possibly calculate time from that? "I've been here 4,000 years, the thing said. By your calendar, I was captured during the fall. I remember my name. Want to know what it is? I didn't respond. Didn't care. Names were luxuries I'd abandoned long ago. I don't remember it either, the thing laughed, a sound like breaking chitin. Not really. I remember remembering it, understand? I remember that I once knew my name, remember the feeling of knowing it, but the actual name is gone. Erased. Not by the Drukhari, they've done plenty to me, but they never bothered erasing my name. I erased it myself. Forgot it deliberately because holding on to it hurt too much. Because every time I remembered who I'd been, I had to confront what I'd become. And eventually the pain of that comparison exceeded the pain of forgetting. It paused, and I could hear the rasp of its breathing in the darkness. You're the same. You've forgotten your name, haven't you? Not because they made you forget, but because you couldn't bear to remember. And it was right. Garrett Hollis was gone. Not suppressed, not hidden, genuinely gone, erased by the accumulated weight of trauma and modification and time. I was what I'd become, a weapon, a monster, a thing that killed because that's what it was designed to do. The person who'd loved Mira and wanted to save for a retirement HAB unit had been overwritten so completely that even the memory of him felt like something I'd read about rather than lived. Want to know the worst part? The thing continued. The worst part isn't the torture, isn't the modification, isn't even the time. The worst part is that we've become what they wanted us to become. We've internalized it. We define ourselves by our suffering now. Our identities are constructed around our victimhood. They've turned us into perfect victims, and perfect victims can never escape because escape would mean abandoning the only identity they have left. I wanted to reject that, wanted to argue that somewhere inside I was still human, still capable of being something other than what the Drukhari had made me. But the words wouldn't come because they weren't true, and some part of me that still clung to honesty refused to lie even to myself. The thing was right. I had become my suffering. It was all I was now. The next day, I watched the arachnid thing get torn apart in the pits. It fought well, but not well enough, and the thing that killed it, a mass of crystalline spines and screaming mouths, devoured it slowly while the Drukhari laughed. I felt nothing watching it die. No grief, no horror, nothing. Just a distant acknowledgement that my cell neighbor was gone and would eventually be replaced by another doomed thing. That's when I knew I was truly lost. When I couldn't even feel empathy for something that had understood me, had articulated the horror we shared. Vexathrixus had wondered how much he could change me before I ceased to be me. Somewhere in the cycles of torment, he'd found the answer. Completely. I'd been changed completely. Nothing remained. Nanyained. Then came the gift. I'd been in the pits long enough that I'd become something of a fixture, one of the more reliable killers, valuable enough that my owner took care to preserve me between fights. Then one day I was informed I'd been sold again, not to another pit, but back upward, into the higher districts. Back to a homunculus. Not Vexathrixus this time, but one of his peers, a creature called Sithix who'd purchased me for what he called special purposes. Sithix's laboratory was different from Vexathrixus's. Where Vexathrixus had been focused on systematic documentation and research, Sithix was an artist first and scientist second. His laboratory looked more like a gallery, with each experiment displayed as if it were a sculpture, positioned carefully for maximum aesthetic impact. He walked me through it when I first arrived, showing me his work the way a proud painter might show off a collection. I create beauty from suffering, he explained in that liquid glass voice they all had. Not just suffering itself. Anyone can make something suffer. But beauty, aesthetic perfection achieved through anguish. You are going to be my masterpiece. He showed me what he had in mind through holographic projections. He was going to transform me into something called a pain eternal, a living artwork that would broadcast suffering into the warp itself, creating ripples of anguish that sensitive beings across light years could feel as background misery. I would be anchored to Kamarov permanently. My consciousness expanded and dispersed so that I existed simultaneously at multiple points in space, all of them suffering, all of them broadcasting that suffering outward like a beacon of despair. You'll be immortal, Sithix said, as if this were a gift. Not in the crude sense of simply not dying, but truly immortal. Your consciousness will be woven into Kamarag's structure itself. You'll feel every torture that occurs in my district. You'll be aware of every prisoner's agony. You'll experience the accumulated suffering of thousands simultaneously forever. And through you, that suffering will leak into the Imperium, will touch the dreams of humans light years away, will add to the background misery of the universe. You'll be art on a cosmic scale. The process took, I don't know. Time had ceased having any meaning long before, but this was different. During the transformation, my perception of time fragmented and multiplied. I experienced each moment from dozens of perspectives simultaneously as Sithix added to and modified what the Twisted Helix had created. He installed warp interface devices directly into my nervous system, crystalline structures that ached like frozen fire. He expanded my consciousness, forcibly enlarging my capacity for awareness beyond anything a human mind was designed to hold. He anchored me to Kamara itself, fusing my body with the dark city's architecture so that I became part of its structure. And then he activated it. The pain was beyond description, beyond comprehension. It wasn't just my pain anymore, it was everyone's pain. I felt every torture occurring in Sithix's district, experienced every prisoner's suffering as if it were my own. Thousands of agonies flooded my consciousness simultaneously, each one distinct, each one demanding attention, each one overwhelming. A human being flayed alive in Chamber 94, an Eldar having their soul slowly extracted in Laboratory 27, something that might have been a Tau being dissolved in acid baths that kept their nervous system intact in holding cell 812. On and on, an infinite catalog of horrors that I couldn't shut out, couldn't escape, couldn't even die to avoid because I was woven too deeply into Kamarai's structure to die anymore. My body, what remained of it, was positioned in the center of Sithix's gallery, mounted on a pedestal of writhing black metal. My limbs were splayed outward, cruciform, and from each extremity extended tendrils of crystallized suffering that connected me to the gallery walls, to the floor, to the ceiling, to the district beyond. My face had been modified further, features rearranged to display maximum agony, eyes held permanently open so visitors could see the madness in them, mouth frozen in an eternal scream that no sound escaped, because Sithix wanted the horror to be visible but not audible. Sound would have been crude, would have interfered with the aesthetic. Drukhari came to view me, hundreds of them, thousands perhaps, over what might have been years or centuries. They stood before me and drank in my suffering, their faces showing that particular expression of satisfaction that came from experiencing refined anguish. They discussed me, debated my merits as an artwork, compared me to other pain eternals they'd seen. Some touched the tendrils that extended from my body, and when they did, they gasped, experiencing a fraction of what I experienced, getting a taste of the cosmic suffering I'd become. Sithix was pleased. His masterpiece was a success. I'd become everything he'd envisioned, a nexus of torment, a beacon of despair, a work of art that would last as long as Kamara itself existed. And through it all, some fragment of consciousness that might have once been Garrett Hollis remained aware. Not as an individual anymore, that was long gone, but as a witness, a perspective, a point of view trapped in the center of infinite suffering, observing it all with perfect clarity, unable to forget, unable to acclimate, unable to do anything except exist and suffer and broadcast that suffering outward into the universe forever. 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 That's the word that breaks you in the end. Not the pain. You can almost adapt to pain, given enough time, enough exposure. The body and mind have limits to what they can process, and eventually, even the most extreme agony becomes a kind of baseline, a constant hum of suffering that fades into background noise. But forever? Forever has no adaptation. Forever means that even if you somehow found a way to endure today's torment, tomorrow's awaits, and the day after, and the day after that. Forever means no escape, no eventual peace, no blessed oblivion, just continuation, endless continuation. I tried to go mad, tried to let my consciousness shatter completely, to fragment beyond any possibility of coherence. But the modifications wouldn't allow it. Sithix had been thorough. My mind was forced to remain organized, forced to process and experience everything with crystalline clarity. Madness would have been mercy, and mercy had no place in Kamara. I tried to retreat inward, to find some inner space where I could hide from the sensory assault. But there was nowhere to hide. My consciousness had been expanded too far, spread too thin. I existed in too many places simultaneously to have a center to retreat to. Every attempt to withdraw just made me more aware of other instances of suffering I'd been filtering out. I tried to simply stop thinking, to reduce myself to pure stimulus response without consciousness. But consciousness was what I was now. I'd been transformed into awareness itself, into the capacity to experience given form. Stopping consciousness would be like asking a star to stop shining. It wasn't something I could do because it was what I was. So I endured. Not because I was strong or brave or heroic, but because I had no choice. Because the Drukhari had engineered me to endure, had built continuation into my very structure. I existed and suffered and would continue existing and suffering for as long as Kamarag itself existed. Time passed, measured not in days or years, but in the accumulation of witnessed horrors, in the catalog of agonies that flowed through me. I learned to recognize individual prisoners by their suffering, not by seeing them. I couldn't see from my position, but by feeling their unique signature of pain. That human with the modified nervous system in Sector 12 who always screamed in a specific pitch. That Eldar in Sector 47 whose suffering had a musical quality. That thing in Sector 93 that wasn't properly alive anymore but still experienced pain because the homunculi kept its nervous system active. They became familiar, these individual agonies. Not friends. I had no capacity for friendship anymore, but familiar presences in the vast ocean of suffering I swam in. Some of them ended. Prisoners died final deaths or were removed from Sithix's district, and suddenly their suffering disappeared from my awareness, leaving gaps in the constant drone of pain I experienced. New prisoners arrived to replace them, new signatures of agony to learn and recognize. The cycle continued. Forever. Sithix occasionally adjusted me, fine-tuning his masterpiece. He'd add new connections, expand my range, increase my sensitivity to certain types of suffering. Each adjustment made me more effective as a pain eternal, more capable of broadcasting despair into the warp, more perfect as an artwork. He'd explain what he was doing as he worked, still that same clinical narration I remembered from Vexathrixis, as if I was a student being taught rather than a victim being tortured. "You're becoming something unprecedented," he said during one adjustment. "Most pain eternals are limited in scope, broadcasting to a single planet or system. But you're reaching farther. I've detected your influence in the dreams of humans 3 sectors away. Not overt, not obvious, just a subtle background wrongness that makes their lives slightly more miserable. Billions of humans experiencing marginally more despair because you exist. That's art on a civilizational scale." He was proud of me, proud of what he'd created. And in some distant, fragmented way, I understood that pride because I could feel it through our connection. Could sense his satisfaction, his aesthetic pleasure, his joy in having created something so fundamentally horrible. The understanding didn't create sympathy. I had no sympathy left for anything, but it gave me perspective. I wasn't just suffering for the sake of suffering. I was suffering to validate Sithix's artistic vision, to serve as proof of his skill, to be appreciated by other Drukhari as evidence of his mastery. My agony had meaning, purpose, value, just not to me. This revelation should have broken something in me, should have created despair beyond despair, the recognition that my suffering served a purpose, and that purpose was someone else's gratification. But I was already broken, had been broken so many times in so many ways that there was nothing left to break. The revelation was just information, data processed and filed away in my expanded consciousness, adding to the infinite catalog of horrors I contained. Then something changed. I don't know what caused it. Perhaps a shift in Kamara's political landscape, perhaps a decision by Sithix, perhaps simple random chance in a city where chaos and order blended into something beyond human comprehension. But I became aware of changes in my connections, alterations to the tendrils that linked me to the district's architecture. Sithix was moving me, transplanting his masterpiece, taking me somewhere else. The disconnection was agony beyond anything I'd experienced before, and I'd experienced extremes that would shatter minds. Each tendril ripped from its anchor felt like having my consciousness torn in pieces, and there were hundreds of tendrils, thousands perhaps, each one requiring individual removal. The process took days, maybe weeks, during which I existed in a state of partial dissolution, my awareness fragmenting as the connections that held me together were systematically severed. When the disconnection was complete, there was a moment, brief, beautiful, terrible, where I existed as something discrete again. Not Garrett Hollis, that person was gone forever, but as an individual consciousness rather than a distributed network. I could think in linear sequences again, could focus on single thoughts rather than processing thousands of simultaneous agonies. It lasted perhaps a second, perhaps a minute, before Sithix began the reconnection process in my new location. The new location was different, larger. I could sense it even before the connections were established. This was a major gallery, one of the premier exhibition spaces in Kamara, where only the most significant artworks were displayed. Sithix was positioning me alongside works by legendary homunculi, pieces that had endured for millennia, eternals whose suffering had touched billions. I was being elevated, promoted, given a place of honor in the Dark City's artistic hierarchy. The reconnection was slower than the disconnection, each tendril carefully positioned for maximum effect. Sithix wasn't just plugging me in, he was choreographing my suffering, arranging my consciousness's connection points to create specific patterns in how the pain would flow through me and out into the warp. As each connection was established, I felt my awareness expanding again, spreading through this new district, linking to new prisoners and their unique varieties of torment. But something was different this time. This district held more than just prisoners. It held other pain eternals, dozens of them. And as my consciousness expanded to fill the space Sithix had prepared, I brushed against theirs, and in that contact I learned that I was not unique. There were others like me, had been others for thousands of years. Beings who'd been transformed into living artworks, anchored to Kamara, forced to experience and broadcast suffering eternally. Some had been pain eternals longer than I'd been alive. Some had once been Eldar, or Tau, or species I'd never heard of. They existed throughout the gallery, each positioned carefully, each broadcasting their own unique signature of despair into the universe. And we could sense each other, not communicate. Sithix hadn't designed us for that, but we were aware of each other's existence, could feel the boundaries where one eternal's consciousness ended and another's began. We were islands in an ocean of suffering, close enough to know we weren't alone, but too far apart to offer any comfort or companionship. Just near enough to understand that our isolation was multiplied, that we each suffered individually, while being aware that others suffered alongside us. This should have been comforting, should have created solidarity, a sense of shared experience, even in horror. But it didn't. It only made the loneliness worse. Because knowing others suffered the same way I did didn't reduce my suffering, it multiplied it, added their loneliness to mine, created a meta-awareness that suffering wasn't special or unique, but common, universal, the default state of existence for those unfortunate enough to be valued by the Drukhari. The gallery opened to visitors shortly after my installation. Thousands of Drukhari came to view the new exhibit, to experience the masterworks of suffering on display. They moved between us Eternals, comparing us, discussing our relative merits, appreciating the artistry of our construction. Some had favorites. I overheard a noble lady explaining to her companions that she preferred an eternal 3 pedestals over from me, something that had once been human, but had been transformed so extensively it resembled a flower of fused limbs and exposed organs. Because its suffering had more depth, more complexity than mine, others disagreed, debated, argued aesthetics the way art critics in the Imperium might debate the merits of different painters. Except the art they discussed was agony, and the medium was consciousness, and the canvas was beings who'd once had names and lives and hopes. I hung there, cruciform, splayed, woven into Kamara's architecture, and listened to them critique my suffering, listened to them praise Sithix's skill in creating me, listened to them debate whether my particular variety of despair was more or less refined than the Eternals positioned nearby, and I couldn't even hate them anymore. Hatred required too much energy too much focused attention, and I had none to spare. I could only exist and endure and broadcast my suffering outward into a universe that would never know its source. Years passed, or centuries, or millennia. In the gallery, time had even less meaning than it had in Vexathrix's laboratory or Calera's arena or any of the other places I'd been. Nothing changed. Visitors came and went. Other Eternals occasionally malfunctioned or were removed and replaced. The gallery's curator, a homunculus named Theriax who worked under Sithix, made regular adjustments to all of us, keeping us functioning optimally, ensuring our suffering remained pure and intense. But the fundamental reality never altered. We hung in our pedestals and suffered and broadcast that suffering forever. I began to lose myself in a different way than before. Not forgetting who I'd been, that had happened long ago, but losing the sense of being a discrete entity at all. My consciousness, spread across so many connection points, maintaining awareness of so many simultaneous agonies, began to dissolve into the larger pattern of suffering. I became less I and more we, less an individual experiencing pain, and more pain itself experiencing awareness. This dissolution was neither peaceful nor agonizing. It simply was. A state of being that transcended the categories I'd once used to organize experience. I existed as a phenomenon rather than a person, as a process rather than an entity. The question of whether this was worse than what came before or better became meaningless. It wasn't worse or better. It was different. It was what I had become. And in that state of dissolution, I began to understand something about Kamara itself. The Dark City wasn't just a place where suffering occurred. It was suffering made manifest, given physical form. Every stone in its architecture had absorbed eons of agony. Every shadow held echoes of screams that had been screamed so many times they'd imprinted on reality itself. The city was alive in its way, and its life was sustained by the accumulated torment of trillions. We Eternals weren't separate from the city. We were part of it, extensions of it, organs in a vast body whose only function was to suffer and make others suffer. This understanding should have been terrifying, should have been the final revelation that broke whatever remained of my sanity. But instead it was almost calming, because it meant I wasn't alone. Not in the sense of having companionship, but in the sense of being part of something larger. My suffering wasn't isolated. It was woven into a tapestry of suffering that spanned a city the size of a solar system, that had endured for thousands of years, that would likely endure for thousands more. I was a thread in that tapestry, a single note in a symphony of screams, and understanding that gave my existence meaning, even if that meaning was horrific beyond measure. The Drukhari understood this too, I realized. That's why they preserved us so carefully, why they treated us as art. We weren't just providing entertainment or sustenance, we were architecture, infrastructure, the foundational elements upon which their entire civilization was built. They fed on our suffering, yes, but more than that, they lived within it, surrounded by it, defined by it. We Eternals were the pillars holding up their society, and if we ever stopped suffering, if we were ever freed or destroyed, something fundamental about Kamara would collapse. This revelation was what finally killed hope. Not the torment itself, not the knowledge that it would continue forever, but the understanding that it had to continue forever. That I served a purpose beyond entertainment, a structural purpose, that my suffering was load-bearing. Releasing me would be like removing a foundation stone from a building, technically possible but catastrophically destructive. The Drukhari couldn't free me even if they wanted to, which they didn't, because doing so would damage the very fabric of their city. I was trapped not by chains or technology or even by the modifications that had been made to my body and consciousness. I was trapped by necessity, by function, by the role I now played in Kamara's existence. I had become part of the city itself, and the city was eternal. Time continued its meaningless flow. I hung in the gallery, suffered, broadcast despair, and slowly dissolved further into the larger pattern of Kamara's agony. Visitors came and went. Sithix occasionally made appearances, checking on his masterpiece, making minor adjustments, expressing satisfaction at how well I was functioning. Other homunculi brought their own works to the gallery, positioning their new Eternals alongside established ones like myself, expanding the collection, adding new varieties of suffering to the tapestry. I watched them, not with eyes. I had no control over my eyes anymore, but through the distributed awareness that came from being woven into the gallery structure. Watched them create new Eternals from captured prisoners. Watched the prisoners arrive, still clinging to hope, still believing they might escape or be rescued. Watched that hope systematically destroyed through torture and modification and time. Watched them break and be rebuilt and break again, until finally they were positioned on pedestals of their own and connected to the gallery and began broadcasting their own suffering into the void. Each new Eternal added to my burden. Because I was connected to the gallery itself, I felt them join the network, felt their anguish merge with the larger pattern I was part of. Their pain became my pain, not metaphorically but literally, processed through the same distributed consciousness that held whatever remained of me. I existed now as a collector of suffering, a vessel that held thousands of individual agonies and synthesized them into something larger, something cosmic in scope, and through it all, some distant fragment that might once have been Garrett Hollis observed. Not with judgment or emotion, those were long gone, but with simple awareness. I noted the passage of Eternals through the gallery, memorized their unique signatures of pain, recognized when they failed and were replaced. I became an archivist of suffering, a living record of Kamarais cruelty, documenting atrocity after atrocity in the infinite storage space of my expanded consciousness. This documentation wasn't deliberate, wasn't a choice. It was simply what I did, what I'd become, the function I now served. I was memory made manifest, holding the accumulated suffering of millennia, broadcasting it endlessly into a universe that would never truly understand what it was feeling, that would only know that somewhere, something made existence marginally more miserable, and that something would never stop. The end, when it came, wasn't an end at all. There was a disturbance in Kamara, not the usual political violence or territorial disputes, something larger, more fundamental. I felt it first as a disruption in the patterns of suffering I monitored, agonies suddenly cutting off or intensifying without explanation, followed by structural damage to the gallery itself. The ceiling cracked. Several Eternals disconnected catastrophically, their consciousness scattering into static. Theriax arrived in a panic, attempting to stabilize the damage, but whatever was happening was beyond his control. Later, hours, days, I learned what had occurred. A raid. One of the Imperium's Grey Knights chapters had somehow penetrated Kamarag's defenses, had fought their way through multiple districts, had destroyed several major installations before being repelled. The raid hadn't reached our gallery, but the secondary effects had been severe. Kamara itself had shuddered, dimensional boundaries had fluctuated, and the careful architecture of suffering that defined the city had been disrupted. For a moment, just a moment, I thought this might be the end. That the raid would destabilize the city enough to free me, to finally grant the oblivion I'd stopped hoping for centuries ago. But Kamara was more resilient than that, more permanent. The Drukhari rallied, repaired the damage, reinforced the boundaries, and within days, or what passed for days in that timeless place, everything was back to normal. The Eternals who'd been destroyed were replaced with new ones. The gallery reopened, visitors returned, nothing had changed, except something had changed in me. That moment of potential freedom, brief as it was, had rekindled something I thought was dead forever. Not hope, I was too far gone for hope, but awareness. Recognition that I was still capable of wanting something, even if that something was impossible. I wanted to end, wanted to stop existing, wanted release from the eternal suffering I'd been transformed into. But I couldn't have it. The modifications were too thorough, the integration too complete. I was part of Kamara now, woven into its structure, dependent on its existence and necessary to its continued function. I couldn't die because dying would require being separate from the city, and I wasn't separate anymore. I was architecture, infrastructure, a component in a machine that would run forever. This understanding, really understanding, not just intellectually knowing, but truly grasping at every level of my distributed consciousness, was worse than anything the Drukhari had deliberately done to me. Because it meant that even if they wanted to free me, even if some impossible miracle occurred, and the Drukhari decided to show mercy, Even if Sithix himself tried to disconnect me and restore what I'd been, it wouldn't work. I couldn't be restored, couldn't be freed, couldn't be anything except what I'd become. I was eternal suffering given form, a monument to cruelty, a beacon of despair that would broadcast misery into the universe forever. And the worst part, the truly worst part, was that I would remain aware of this forever, would spend eternity knowing what I was, understanding my purpose, unable to forget or go mad or die or escape. This is what it means to be a prisoner of the Drukhari. Not the torture, though the torture is beyond measure. Not the modification, though the modifications transcend horror. Not even the time, though time stretches to infinity. What it means is to be transformed so completely that you become inseparable from your suffering, to have your consciousness itself converted into a medium for expressing agony, to exist eternally as both victim and victimization simultaneously. I hang here in Sithix's gallery. I have hung here for what might be millennia. I will hang here for millennia more, broadcasting despair into the dreams of humans I will never meet, touching civilizations I will never know, making the universe marginally darker simply by existing. And I will remain aware of this forever, will understand what I am and what I do, and what I can never stop being. That is the gift the Drukhari give their prisoners: eternal life without hope, immortality without peace, existence without end and without purpose beyond suffering. They have turned me into living proof that some fates are worse than death, that mercy has limits beyond which even death cannot reach. My name was Garrett Hollis. I had a wife and a daughter and a dream of retirement. Now I am nameless suffering given form, a cosmic horror built from human flesh and alien cruelty, a testament to the darkest truth the universe holds. The worst pain in the galaxy is not the flaying of flesh or the shattering of bone. It is the knowledge that you exist solely as entertainment, that your suffering serves a purpose, that you will never stop existing, and that you will remain aware of this forever. This is what it means to be a prisoner of the Drukhari. This is what I am. This is what I will be. Forever.